Our world is several billion years old, yet only about 6,000 years ago, recorded history of the Western world began. 500 years ago, European explorers discovered the Americas, and this accidental event changed the future of both the Old World and the New, as well as that of Asia and Africa. Earth took on its present form slowly. 225 million years ago, a single supercontinent contained all of the dry land of the world. Chunks of land drifted away, opening the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, narrowing the Pacific Ocean, and forming the continents of Eurasia, Africa, Australia, Antarctica, and the Americas. Mountain ranges were thrusted up from continued shifting and folding of the Earth's crust. The ancient Appalachians were formed even before continental separation some 350 million years ago. The Rockies, Sierra Nevada, Cascades, and Coast Ranges arose more recently, born after the continent took shape. The basic geological shape of North America was achieved about 10 million years ago. The Canadian Shield is a massive zone undergirded by ancient rock, the first part of our North American landmass to emerge above sea level. The Tidewater region, a narrow eastern coastal plain creased by many river valleys, sloped upward to the ridges of the Appalachians. The Mississippi Valley is west of the Appalachians, followed by the huge mid-continental basin. Further west, the Rockies rose up, followed by the Intermountain Great Basin, then the Sierra and Cascade Ranges. The Coast Ranges are located on the Pacific coast. Beginning about 2 million years ago, Earth had a great ice age. In North America, great glaciers carpeted most of present-day Canada and the United States. When the glaciers retreated about 10,000 years ago, they left the landscape much as it is today. Class, you'll need to know the basic geography of America. You'll need to know the coastlines, the river systems, the mountains, the valleys, and the plains. The Great Ice Age contributed to the origins of the continent's human history. Recent evidence suggests that some early peoples reached the Americas in crude boats from Europe, Asia, and Australia. 35,000 years ago, the Ice Age forced sea levels to drop dramatically. As the sea level dropped, a land bridge connecting Eurasia with North America in the area of the present-day Bering Sea between Siberia and Alaska formed. Nomadic Asian hunters followed wild game across the land bridge into the Americas. The Ice Age ended, and the ice melted about 10,000 years ago, and the land bridge disappeared. By the time Europeans arrived in America in 1492, as many as 52 million people inhabited the two American continents. Over the centuries, they split into countless tribes, spoke more than 2,000 languages, and developed many diverse cultures. Incas in Peru, Mayans in Central America, and Aztecs in Mexico had sophisticated civilizations. They practiced advanced agriculture based mainly on Indian corn called maize. However, These civilizations lacked large draft animals such as horses and oxen, or even simple technology of the wheel. Yet they still carried on long-distance commerce. Aztecs routinely slaughtered thousands of people with human sacrifice to appease their gods. Agriculture, and especially corn growing, accounted for the size and sophistication of the Native American civilizations in Mexico and South America. Corn cultivation reached North America, but dense concentrations of population comparable to the Aztec Empire did not exist outside of Mexico by the time Europeans arrived. The mound builders of the Ohio River Valley, the Mississippi culture of the lower Midwest, and the desert-dwelling Anasazi peoples of the Southwest did sustain some large populations with the introduction of corn planting. The Mississippi settlement at Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, was home to as many as 5,000 people. Along the eastern seaboard region, three-sister farming took place, with beans growing on a trellis of corn stalks, and squash covering the planting mounds to retain the moisture of the soil. The Iroquois in the northeastern woodlands came closest to the great empires of the Aztecs in Mexico and the Incas of Peru. Norsemen from Scandinavia did establish settlements in North America around the year 1000 in present-day Newfoundland, but they were soon abandoned and Europeans were unaware of the existence of the Americas. Some ambitious Europeans sought contact with the wider world through trade and conquest, and it was they who became indirect discoverers of the New World. Christian crusaders in the 11th through 14th centuries fought to take the Middle Eastern Holy Land from Muslim control. This exposure to the cultures of the East caused Europeans to acquire a taste for exotic goods from Asia. Trade developed for silk, medicines, perfumes, colorful draperies, spices, and sugar. These luxuries were very expensive, and Muslim middlemen forced prices up so high that there were very few in Europe who could afford to pay for these items. European traders searched for less expensive trade routes to Asia. Marco Polo, an Italian adventurer trader, returned to Europe in 1295 with fantastic tales of his 20-year travels in China. His book, with its vivid descriptions of the treasures of the East, aroused great interest in finding alternative, profitable trade routes. The pressure for trade and profits eventually brought a breakthrough for European expansion. Before the 1400s, sailors refused to sail southward along the coast of Africa because the prevailing winds and current prevented them from returning home. About 1450, however, Portuguese sailors overcame the obstacles of wind and current with the invention of the caravel, a ship with a triangular sail that could sail more closely into the wind. The Portuguese set up trading posts along the African coast to purchase gold and slaves from Arab traders. The Portuguese adopted Arab and African slave practices and built up their own systematic traffic in slaves to work the sugar plantations. Large-scale commercial agriculture, along with the wholesale exploitation of slave labor, developed and helped shape the future plantation economy in much of the New World. By 1492, Spain was developing into a modern nation-state. Spain had united and finally expelled the Arab Muslim invaders from its lands. Christopher Columbus, an Italian seafarer, convinced the Spanish monarchs to invest in 3 small ships to head westward in hopes of sailing across the globe to Asia, or the Indies as he called it. Instead, Columbus discovered America, and for many years thereafter, Europeans tried to find a way to go through or around America to trade with the Indies. Columbus was so convinced that he had indeed found the Indies that he named the inhabitants of America Indians, a name that has permanently stuck. The Columbian Exchange. Columbus's discovery initiated the kind of explosion in international commerce that a later age would call globalization. From the New World, we got gold and silver passing to Europe, along with corn, potatoes, pineapples, tomatoes, tobacco, beans, vanilla, and chocolate. The New World also gave the Old World syphilis. From the Old World to the New World, they gave wheat, sugar, rice, and coffee. Also, horses, cows, and pigs, but also smallpox, measles, bubonic plague, influenza, typhus, diphtheria, and scarlet fever. And from Africa to the New World, we gained slave labor. Gradually, Europeans realized that the American continent had value, especially in gold and silver. Advanced Indian civilizations in what is now Mexico and Peru had accumulated plenty of these valuable commodities, and Spain sought to secure their claim to Columbus's discovery in the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. In the Treaty of Tordesillas, the heathen lands of the New World were divided up between Spain and Portugal. Most of the New World went to Spain, so compensatory land was given to Portugal in Africa and Asia, as well as land in what is today Brazil. Spain developed the encomienda system. Indians were given to certain colonists for the promise to attempt to Christianize them. One Spanish missionary called it a moral pestilence invented by Spain, because the system was essentially slavery by another name. In 1519, Hernán Cortés, a Spanish conquistador, set sail from Cuba with 16 horses and about 300 men aboard 11 ships bound for Mexico. Cortés and his men went on to conquer the Aztec Empire. Shortly afterward, Francisco Pizarro conquered the Incas of South America. The result of all this captured gold and silver wealth of the Aztecs and Incas was the beginning of a modern capitalistic system. These precious metals filled bankers' vaults and laid the foundation of modern banking, stimulating commerce and manufacturing. The Spanish invaders also created a striated society with rights of citizens based on race, with Spaniards born in Spain on the top of the pyramid and slaves at the bottom. Cortés and his conquistadors entered the Valley of Mexico and discovered the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. They met there Emperor Montezuma and demanded gold. On June 30th, 1520, Noche Triste, sad night, the Aztecs attacked. After a retreat, Cortez laid siege to the city, and on August 13th, 1521, Tenochtitlan surrendered. In the same year, smallpox ripped through the Valley of Mexico. The Indian temples were destroyed and Christian cathedrals were built. The native population shrunk from about 20 million to 2 million people in less than a century. Spanish intermarried with the surviving Indians and created the mestizo culture. Hundreds of Spanish cities and towns flourished in both North and South America, especially in the silver-producing regions in present-day Peru and Mexico. 160,000 Spaniards, mostly men, controlled millions of Indians. Spain built cathedrals and universities long before the English established their colonies in North America. And Spain worked to secure their colonial possessions against foreign interlopers by fortifying and settling their northern territories. The English sent John Cabot to explore the northeastern coast of North America in 1497 and 1498. The French sent Giovanni de Verrazzano to explore the eastern American shore in 1524. 10 years later, Jacques Cartier explored the St. Lawrence River. Spain erected a fortress at St. Augustine, Florida, to block French ambitions in the Caribbean. Conquistadores pushed northward in what is now called the American Southwestern region and cruelly abused the Pueblo people. In the Battle of Acoma in 1599, the Spanish cut off a foot from each survivor and proclaimed the area to be the province of New Mexico with Santa Fe as its capital in 1610. Pope's rebellion was an Indian uprising in 1680 in which Pueblo rebels destroyed every Roman Catholic church in the province. The Black Legend is the exaggerated belief that Spanish conquerors were only concerned with torture and abuse toward American Indians as they stole their gold and infected them with smallpox. Although they did indeed murder, enslave, and infect millions, the Spanish were empire builders. The planting of English America. North of Mexico, 3 European powers planted 3 primitive outposts in 3 different corners of the continent within 3 years of each other. The English Protestant Reformation took place in the 1530s, and Catholics battled Protestants for decades. When Protestant Queen Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1558, Protestants became dominant. Irish Catholics asked Spain for help, but the Spanish aid never amounted to much. English buccaneers had 2 goals: Protestantism and plunder. The first English attempt at colonization was in Newfoundland. Its promoter, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, died at sea in 1583, and the effort collapsed. Gilbert's half-brother, Sir Walter Raleigh, tried in warmer Roanoke Island off the coast of Virginia in 1585. The colony mysteriously vanished. Spain's invincible armada of ships set sail to invade England in 1588. Spain's ships were too slow and unmaneuverable as compared to English ships. A devastating storm arose, called the Protestant Wind, and the Spanish Armada was left scattered and crippled. England and its naval dominance in the Atlantic were on the rise, while Spain was on the decline. Sir Humphrey Gilbert promoted the first English colonizing attempt off the coast of Newfoundland and then died at sea. Sir Walter Raleigh, one of Queen Elizabeth's favorites, known for his wit and good looks until he seduced one of her maids of honor, launched important colonizing efforts in North America, and failure. Sir Francis Drake swashbuckled and looted his way around the globe as the Queen's buccaneer, pursuing Protestantism and plunder. The forerunner of the modern corporation was the Joint Stock Company, in which a number of investors, called adventurers, pooled their money. In 1606, the Virginia Company of London, a joint stock company, received a charter from King James I. The object was to look for gold. It was only intended to last a few years. The charter was significant. It guaranteed settlers the same rights as all Englishmen. Indians attacked them at Chesapeake Bay, so they retreated to the disease-infested banks of the St. James River. Settlers died in great numbers due to disease, malnutrition, and starvation, while they looked for gold and neglected gathering provisions. Captain John Smith came to the rescue. "He who shall not work shall not eat," was his famous quote. After the winter of 1609 and 1610, the surviving colonists attempted to leave on homeward bound ships in the spring of 1610. A new governor, Lord De La Warr, ordered the settlement back to Jamestown. The First Anglo-Powhatan War. In 1610, the Virginia Company declared war on the Powhatans, using Irish tactics. In 1614, began an 8-year fragile peace with the marriage of John Rolfe and Pocahontas. But in 1622, 347 settlers were killed, including John Rolfe, and at that time, Virginia Company declared war perpetually without peace. The Second Anglo-Powhatan War. In 1644, Indians made a last-ditch effort to rid themselves of Virginia settlers. By 1646, the Chesapeake Indians were banished, and by 1683, Powhatans were considered extinct. European colonization was disastrous for the Indians. Native American life was changed dramatically. With the introduction of horses, the Sioux Indians went from forest dwellers to nomads of the plain. But disease was the biggest disruptor of life. John Rolfe, the husband of Pocahontas, became the father of the tobacco industry. By 1612, he had perfected methods of raising and curing the leafy drug. Tobacco was the main source of income in Virginia. In 1619, representative self-government was born. An assembly called the House of Burgesses was established and authorized by the Virginia Company. King James I was not happy about it. Maryland's Act of Toleration guaranteed toleration to all Christians, but the death penalty for Jews and atheists who denied the divinity of Jesus Christ. England claimed several West Indian islands. Jamaica was secured in 1655. Sugar was the foundation of the Caribbean economy. Sugar plantations needed a great deal of capital to get started, and it required labor. Imported African slaves were needed to work the sugar plantations, more than 250,000 between 1640 and 1690. By 1700, black slaves outnumbered white settlers in the English West Indies. The Barbados Slave Code denied human rights to slaves. The West Indies came to depend on North American mainland for food and basic supplies. Small English farmers from the West Indies immigrated to the mainland. A group landed in Carolina in 1670. They brought slaves and the Barbados Slave Code with them. Colonization was interrupted during the period of bloody unrest. During the Restoration period, empire building resumed. Carolina was named after King Charles II. Carolina had close economic ties to the Sugar Islands. Carolina was really the northern outpost to the West Indies, as it supplied the Sugar Islands with foodstuffs and traded many other items. Carolina settlers traded slaves, some of them Indians. As many as 10,000 were captured, enslaved, and sold. Before all the Savannah Indians migrated away from Carolina, they suffered a series of attacks that exterminated most of the Indian tribes of coastal Carolina by 1710. North Carolina emerged when discontented Virginians, many of whom were impoverished or religious dissenters, moved to the northern expanse of the huge Carolina colony. There were bloody relations between the North Carolinians and the Indians. The Tuscadora Indians were crushed and enslaved with the help of South Carolina. 40 years later, the Yamasee Indians were wiped out. Georgia, the last of the 13 colonies, 126 years after the first, Virginia, and 52 years after the 12th, Pennsylvania, is known as the Buffer Colony. It served to protect the more valuable Carolinas against the encroaching Spanish from Florida and the equally hostile French from Louisiana. It was launched by a group of philanthropists who wished for a place to send those who were imprisoned for debt and give them a new start. One of the founders was James Oglethorpe, who was greatly interested in prison reform after one of his close friends died in debtor's jail. England's southernmost colonies had certain things in common. They were all devoted to exporting commercial agricultural products. Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia were known as the plantation colonies. Profitable crops like tobacco and rice were grown, and slavery was found in all of the plantation colonies. The wide scattering of farms along rivers slowed the growth of cities. The large plantations, which held huge acreage in the hands of a wealthy few, tended to create an aristocratic atmosphere. The rich were firmly in control. The Church of England was tax-supported, although there was religious toleration to some extent in the plantation colonies.